Hi there everyone, Lars here with a writer's review of Amazon's Wheel of Time, brought to you by Camille's Harem. Not just a podcast for novice writers by novice writers, but also a YouTube channel by novice writers for novice writers. Because writing is an adventure, it's more fun with friends. And for this particular review, I am going to be diving into a realm of writing that we as novice writers don't really get involved in usually, unless you are one of those lucky few who actually get to do screenplays for big shows or movies. Yet still, I think there's something very valuable for us to take away from the experience of watching The Wheel of Time. Now then, I am going to be getting into spoilers for the show, and I should also preface this by saying, yes, I have read the books. No, I am not the biggest fan, yet I really like the works of Robert Jordan, and also the later entries from Brandon Sanderson, who finished up the series. There's a lot that Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson put into the series that I really enjoyed and that I took away for my own writing. In fact, there are actually parts of my main series, The Legend of the Ten Lords, that were heavily inspired by The Wheel of Time, where I was like, whoa! I really need to get more into the heads of my villains and bring out those more human aspects of them. That's something that Robert Jordan did very well. He writes fantastic, evil villains who are also very human and very relatable. It's one of the things that makes them really scary and also very much hateable, because you're like, wow, they are human and scumbags, and yet, they're just so wonderfully overpowered. Also, I really love how Robert Jordan is able to write wonderfully complex romances that give you all the good steamy bits, but are also very incredibly respectful to the characters. None of the smut that you get in Game of Thrones. I also really enjoy how Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson are able to build up to these huge, magnificent battles that just flow so wonderfully. Those are things that I really wanted to be able to emulate within my own story, because it struck a chord with me. The Wheel of Time is a fantastic epic, full of just incredible things going on, with wonderful heroes who come from all different kinds of backgrounds, whether they be noblemen, peasants, lost heroes, performers, kings, queens, what have you. All of them have it within them to be amazing heroes or to be incredible villains. And that's just something that is so great to read. Now, for this review, I'm already going to come out and say I think one of the biggest things that we can take away as novice writers from watching something like The Wheel of Time is that it really pays off to go with the ideas that have been edited well. And what I mean by that is the Wheel of Time books are really a work of love. They went through a lot of effort to make them happen. Robert Jordan spent a huge chunk of his life to write them, to go over them again and again, be very thorough with the world building, and his wife, his editor, was also very thorough with making sure that the characters, the plots, the world building elements, the themes, and everything were exactly what they needed to be. As a result, very good editing made a very strong story. When you watch the Wheel of Time series, it's very clear to see what is taken directly from Robert Jordan and then what was added in by the screenwriters. And what I mean by that is you can tell very easily, especially as someone who has read the books, what parts are Robert Jordan's and what was added in by the screenwriters. And what was added by the screenwriters can sometimes be good, but many times it feels like it's been rushed. It feels like it only went through a couple of drafts rather than through multiple revisions and tender loving care. So for me to really illustrate this, I need to get into what the show does and does differently from the books and talk a little bit about the books. This is why I'm giving you guys the spoiler warning that yes, I'm not only talking about what's in the show, but I'm going to be talking about what's in the books and stuff that the books do way down the road. So I'm going to get right on into it already here with episode 1, and let me just tell you my personal opinion. Episode 1 sucks. It is awful. I nearly stopped watching 3 minutes in because of just how badly it smeared the world building. It was awful. And like it tries to give this dramatic introduction into the grand history of the world. And it's done in less than a minute. No, that doesn't work. Look at what Lord of the Rings did. Yes, it's a long segment, but you know what? The opening to the Lord of the Rings is incredible. It tells you all of the important things that you need to know about the backstory to the ring and to Aragorn's past and to Bilbo in order to understand what is happening in the first movie, and then from there the story takes off. And that is so wonderfully done. The first episode should have opened up with Lews Therin losing his mind and creating the Dragon Mount. Why? Well, because you would have already been introduced to the dragon. And no, the show says there's been thousands of dragons. No, there is one dragon. And that's why it is later the Dragon Reborn. There is one dragon, Lews Therin, and Lews Therin is incredibly powerful. Lews Therin is incredibly important to the entire story going forward. This is in large part his story, and we are introduced to him in his final moments as he goes truly insane and destroys his kingdom and creates the Dragon Mount. This is a very, very important moment, not only because of Lews Therin, but because we are introduced to another very important villain who is prevalent throughout the entire series. This is a very good moment for setting the atmosphere of the story, for introducing us to very important characters, and introducing us to very important elements of the world building that will play throughout the entire series. Without this introduction, you are kind of left hanging in the wind as to what is going on. Now, sometimes it's really good to let the audience be a little bit confused, but this is a moment where no, especially if you're introducing people who have no idea what's happening within the Wheel of Time, they need to be firmly grounded in the themes, the characters, the stakes, and the world. It should have begun with the introduction to Lews Therin. Another thing that I do not like is I do not like this strange notion that the Dragon Reborn could be any one of these five. Yes, I know it is there in the book, that it could be Nynaeve, it could be Egwene, it could be Perrin, it could be Mat, it could be Rand. But the thing, though, is that Moiraine is pretty confident it's one of the boys, and she brings along the girls because they are so powerful. And that is the reason why we go this route. I don't like that the show has all of these different fake outs of, oh, who could it be? Because anyone who has even bothered taking a look at the Wheel of Time knows it's Rand. And when you watch the show and you realize that the show really isn't giving any hints that the Dragon Reborn could be Rand, you're just like, wow. You guys really think that people are going to be wowed that it's the redhead because you didn't show us anything about this? No, that's really bad. And I'm sorry, him bashing down a door that shouldn't be opened, that's such a weird little, like, oh, there's our little wink and a nod that the Dragon Reborn is truly Rand, when you're having Egwene do incredible things, where Nynaeve does something that she doesn't even do in the book, where she heals all these people all at once without actually knowing about it. No, that's not how channeling works. You have to know how to properly channel, otherwise you can't make things happen. And on top of that, oh, it could be Perrin with his magical eyes, or oh, it could be Mat because he's going insane. And it's just like, no. Another thing I don't like is I don't like that Mat is given really crappy parents. His parents aren't like that. Sure, his mom is a little weird, but the idea is that within the Two Rivers, there's a bunch of really happy families. Mat is part of a happy family. His relationship with his sisters is a healthy one. It's a teasing one. And it pays off really beautifully later on in the series. And no, Perrin is not married. It's important because he's naive to the ways of love. It's one of the things that gets him into trouble later on in the books. And it's sweet and it's adorable when he starts falling in love because he's never gone through it before. And yeah, he comes across as one of the more bland characters, but honestly, that's okay because why? He is the kid from the small town. He is the kid that no one expects anything from other than to be a reliable blacksmith. And he becomes one of the greatest heroes of the world. Perrin is awesome, by being a regular guy who becomes awesome. And all of this trying to give him the PTSD because he, by accident, murdered his wife and his unborn child in the heat of battle, that just sucked. And honestly, the writers had no idea what to do with this. They completely dropped the ball most of the time when it came to his PTSD, and then they just rushed, honestly, what could have been a really beautiful moment. His moment in the tent, where he's talking with Egwene, where they're both facing death, and he says it's all his fault, and she gives him a really wonderful, heartfelt message that he isn't to blame, and that one day he will be able to forgive himself. That was a great moment, and it was rushed, and it was awful, completing this whole stupid arc of PTSD that was never needed in the show, because it was never needed in the book, because Perrin didn't need that to become an interesting character. Ugh, it's so annoying. And then here's another one right here, because Amazon wanted to have their sweet smexy times by having Rand and Egwene hook up. No, that doesn't happen. Why does that not happen? Because it's important for later on in the story when Rand sleeps with Aviendha, who is one of the Aiel men, and one of my personal favorite characters within the whole series. And it's funny because in the Two Rivers, when you do that, you are supposed to marry the person that you slept with. And so he wants to marry her, but he doesn't understand the customs of the Aiel, which leads to a whole bunch of fantastic misunderstandings. But because he's trying to chase Aviendha, he misses the advances of Min. And that sets off a whole bunch of really hilarious things for their relationship, which then makes Elaine super jealous. And just, there's so many things, because yes, Rand ends up with a harem. He ends up with 3 women who basically become his wives. And understanding that Aviendha is his first, and all of the hilarious things that come across from that, come out of that, well, if you have it where Rand is already sleeping around with other women, even, yes, sure, he loves Egwene and everything in the first book, it ruins a lot of really, really well done relationship building later on down the story, because they wanted to have their awesome, sweet, sexy times early on in the first season. They ended up botching a very, very important moment later on down the line. And this is where editing comes in. Robert Jordan knew where he was going. He knew what he needed to do and what he wanted to do. He plays it all right out there in the very first book, with Min telling Rand that he's going to have 3 women in his life. Aviendha is going to be one of those women, and it begins with her. But with Rand sleeping with Egwene, well, all of that fun nuance and all of that newness to this whole situation of love and his naivety and everything else like that, that's all gone out the window. That is a moment for great character progression that we're not going to get, because Rand has already given that part of himself away. Now, sure, Rand and Egwene love each other, and there's a really great moment in the books where Egwene gets to see what her life could have been if she married Rand. And the truth is, it's beautiful. It's amazing. They've got children. They live a great, happy life. Rand starts going insane, and yet he does everything in his power to make sure that his insanity does not hurt his family, confirming how much he loves Egwene. And that love that they have for each other is there throughout the entire series through the respect that they show each other, despite the fact that they end up becoming almost at one point mortal enemies, that they still care for each other. That is powerful relationship building that the show might not be able to pull off. Now then, I gotta say this. The cast of characters the cast of actors, I should say, that they have for all these characters is phenomenal. There's not a single person that I've yet seen on screen who I'm like, yeah, that does not fit this character. And this is coming from someone who was one of those people to point out saying, yeah, the way that you're casting these characters by trying to be all diverse actually kind of goes against the book, because the whole idea within the book series is that the world becomes more cosmopolitan as the Dragon Reborn goes from kingdom to kingdom to kingdom, uniting all of these different ethnicities and races. Well, okay, fine, whatever. And again, I actually really enjoy how they've cast all of the different characters. And I think that all of the people that they've casted have been wonderful actors. They've all delivered their lines and their moments wonderfully. I am honestly enraptured when it gets good. And when it gets good, The show is good. Episodes 2 and 3 are faithful to the events of the book, and you can see it. You can see it because it just flows so naturally. And in fact, it actually retcons things coming out of the very first episode, which makes the first episode even worse because episodes 2, 3, and 4 retcon so much of what is said in episode 1. Oh my gosh, what is episode 1 should have been scrapped. Whoever wrote the script for episode 1 needs to be taken out back and thrown into the dumpster. But coming back to it, episodes 2, 3, and most of 4 are great because even if you haven't read the books, the conversations that the characters are having, their various moments of heroism and defeat are just so well done. There's some wonderful moments that are heartwarming. There's some moments that are actually downright bone-chilling. There's some really wonderful, horrendous villains that are already introduced, and some really great stuff done with the world building. And I love how the show was able to nail the nuance of the Aes Sedai and their warders. It's honestly really, really great. Now, I do have to say this right here. I am really, really upset that they decided to get rid of the element of the warders being that if the Aes Sedai is killed first, that the warders literally go berserk and insane and die very soon afterwards. I love Stepan. I thought his character was fantastic. I'm happy that they gave so much character to him, but really dragging out his suffering from episodes 4 to 5, it just ate up so much time, and time that should have been spent following especially Rand and Matt as they go about in the city. And this is the episode where Rand should have met Min. And he actually should have met Min way, way earlier. But because we haven't been introduced to Min yet, he needed to be introduced to Min in this episode. Why? Well, because after meeting Loial, he has to know more about what is going on within the world and with his own destiny. And this is the thing that, once again, the creators are not giving us this moment because they do not want to confirm that he is the Dragon Reborn. They're trying to play it out. Ooh, it could be any one of the 5. And right now in the show, they're really heavily hinting that it's Nynaeve. No, it's Rand. And this moment with Min is so incredibly important because it sets up so much of what he is going to be experiencing. Plus, Min, like Aviendha, they're best girls. I love Min and Aviendha. They are the best parts of the entire story, except for when Rand and Matt and Perrin are kicking butt and taking names. They are the best parts. Elaine, not so much. Personal preference, I don't like Elaine. That's just me. But still, moving on again. I love what is done with Stepan. They did a really great job with his character. The actor did a phenomenal job. But then again, like I said, you can tell when something went through a lot of editing and thought and when it really didn't. And while Stepan's story is a really great one, it doesn't make sense with everything else that is going on. Because when we come to the end of episode 5, I was like, wow, that was really beautifully done and everything. Why is this happening? Why aren't we dealing with the fact that Nynaeve, according to what the show is right now doing, is heavily hinting that she's the Dragon Reborn? Isn't that the most important thing going on right now? Why aren't we focusing on that? Plus, also, Perrin is getting tortured, and now he can speak to the wolves? I would like to know more about that. Egwene's beginning to channel? I would like to know more about that. Matt is going insane? What is Rand going to do to try to save him? And Rand is like a fish out of water right now. All of these characters with very important moments going on are given so little time to really do anything so far within the series, and they have barely any room to breathe. As we focus in on a really interesting idea that was created to replace the berserker state of the warders when the warders lose their Aes Sedai. And so the show went on a tangent, went on a weird roundabout to justify. They spent basically an entire episode to justify why they retcon one of the most important world-building elements, that if the Aes Sedai is killed, the warder goes berserk. Why is that important? Well, because when Rand basically gets married to Min, Aviendha, and Elaine, he becomes their warder. And if any one of those 3 is killed, Rand will go berserk and die. And so if the Dark One wants to defeat Rand, all he has to do now is kill one of those 3 women. And guess what? There are 3 of them. 3, the chances to bring the world to its end prematurely. And so Rand has to fight even harder and scheme even harder in order to protect the people closest to him. Why? Because the world depends on it. With that element now out of the way, they can basically throw that entire important plotline out the window. In fact, this even justifies them murdering one of the 3 girls by the end of the series and saying, well, you know what, we didn't think it was cool and not very kosher in our modern times for Rand to be marrying 3 women because, polygamy. I'm sorry, it's in the book, and it's a very important part of the book, and it's a very important set of relationships. You can't just toss this important bit out to justify whatever weird nonsense you're going to do later on down the road. Sure, it's your show, you can do it, but it's not going to be as good as what was done with Robert Jordan, his wife, and Brandon Sanderson laboriously going over decades worth of work to make this story work. I feel like I could rant for a good long time about all of this. There's so many other things going on. And quite honestly, like I said, episodes 2, 3, and most of 4 are really well done. Logain is fantastic. Tom Maryland is phenomenal. The world building, when it is accurate, is beautiful. And what they've done with the different sets and everything is really great. There are some places where I can tell that they kind of skimped a bit on the budget or on certain set pieces. But you know what? I'm going to give it a pass because when the show is doing what it's supposed to do, I genuinely get the feel like I'm watching something akin to Lord of the Rings. It is well done. And I like that. It's just annoying that there are these story beats that don't belong there within the show. Why? Well, because the screenwriters are forcing these little moments in to try to make characters seem more interesting or to retcon things that they didn't feel like they wanted to do. And I know that there's plenty of other fans out there who have been bringing up the more minute details that don't fit within the overall story. And I think once again, that's just because the screenwriters just decided to omit a bunch of stuff, which, well, fine. You know what? That happens. And I'll give a brief example of how this can actually be done well by looking at The Lord of the Rings. So I'll give 2 instances where the Lord of the Rings movies really changed things up from the books. One of the big ones is at the Battle of Helm's Deep. In the movie, the elves show up and fight alongside the humans against the Uruk-hai. This was done by the decision of the director and the producers to say, look, the audience loves the elves. The elves are phenomenal. Why don't we give the elves one last chance to really show up beyond just Legolas doing stuff and really make a difference? And so the elves showed up for the Battle of Helm's Deep. And when they showed it to test audiences, the test audiences loved this. Now, it works within the movie, and it does not break what the book has to offer because, other than the elves showing up, almost beat for beat for beat, the Battle of Helm's Deep happens exactly the way that it is in the books. They just added this element in to give the elves a chance to really have their day. And they also delivered on some really beautiful moments where when the elves are getting killed, there's the sad music and everything to show that these gorgeous, lovely, immortal beings are being slain in just this brutal combat, and it kind of emphasizes why the elves are leaving Middle-earth. Because if they stay, well, this is very likely their fate, and that's just so much beauty and life just gone in an instant. And it helps to reinforce just what is at stake if Sauron gets the ring. All of the beauty of Middle-earth will be consumed in fires, industry, and warfare, which once again falls in line with many of the deeper themes that Tolkien put into his books. The second big change is basically everything that happens with the siege of Minas Tirith. In the movie, it's an army of 200,000 orcs besieging the city. In the book, it's 40,000 orcs and men. Now then, it works in the book the way that it does because Tolkien goes into very heavy detail about the entire siege and the entire battle and everything that happens. And if the movie had emulated what's in the book, it would have been rated R. And because they wanted to have a movie that was accessible to the widest audience possible, they kept it PG-13, which means that they couldn't replicate what's really there in the book. So they decided to go actually bigger. And rather than having this intense, gritty siege where the orcs are just doing these awful things and using these insane machines and it's just such brutal warfare, they went for something way more cinematic. And it works. It works because it still gets across the fact that Tolkien wanted to get across. The orcs are there to completely destroy Minas Tirith. Minas Tirith's fall is very, very important for both the villains and for the heroes. This is the moment of destiny for Aragorn. And now they get to go really big and show off just what Sauron has in store. That moment should have been used at the Black Gates. And yet they put it for Minas Tirith because it honestly works pretty well there. Otherwise, it just would have been almost kind of a waste, because in the book, when Sauron unleashes his full force and you have 70,000 orcs, men, Oliphaunts, and the Ringwraiths descending upon Aragorn and his army, who are just clustered together into two circles waiting to be wiped out within the hour, well, that's a moment that passes really fast because that's when the ring is destroyed. So it would have been this grand epic moment with this huge army that would have been obliterated in a moment, and it would have felt more like a Deus Ex Machina and a cop-out. Whereas, sure, yeah, when the armies of the dead come in and it's an absolute slaughter fest, it might still feel like a bit of a cop-out, except that it is the culmination of Aragorn's journey to reclaim his title as King of Gondor, which is exactly the same way that it is in the books, except that there's a little bit more nuance to it, and that Tolkien didn't want to give Aragorn too easy of a win at the Siege of Minas Tirith. If you want to know more about that, read the book. It is amazing. Now, sure, you guys might say, well, Lars, this just sounds like you are trying to justify what was done in a movie that you really, really enjoy versus a show that you seem kind of ambivalent towards. Well, no, I actually really, really do want The Wheel of Time to succeed. I want it to be popular. I think it has the makings of some really, really great stuff. But once again, when you pay attention to what's happening in the show, the way that parents' PTSD is handled is just bad. And I haven't heard anyone actually come out in defense of that. If anyone has, I need to actually hear what their argument is for it, because it's just honestly awfully done. And knowing what the actual world building is within the books, it removes a lot of really important things that will once again show up later on. And because they are trying to act all like, ooh, who's the dragon reborn, rather than just admitting that it's Rand, well, they're not giving characters or different plot lines really the development that they need, but they're spreading their attention way too thin over way too much space, and it shows. It honestly shows already 5 episodes in. And that is where, once again, paying attention to what the original author did with his work, in which he spent a lot of time making sure that everything was well mapped out, that everything was well planned out, and that everything worked, it makes sense. Because I highly, highly doubt that the screenwriters have an entire roadmap from season 1 to season 13 if they do a season per book. Or even if they decide to combine books into one season, even then, I highly doubt that they already have a clear idea from episode 1 to the defeat of the Dark One. I highly doubt that they have that entire roadmap planned out for what they're going to do in the show. Why? Because they've already begun to change so much up. And if they haven't already gone through the entire long process of completely refining the story up until that point, I guarantee that some of the new things that they decided to introduce without properly putting in all of the time, that it will spin off into unfulfilling conclusions or unresolved plot threads that will pale in comparison to the stuff that they do keep from the books, which is honestly superior because it was properly edited and done. So, once again, novice writers out there, make sure that you go through the process of completely and properly editing your work. It does pay off in the long run. Believe you me, I hate doing editing. I hate going through draft after draft after draft of my own stories because I just want to move on. It's so much fun to engage in the next story. But it needs to be done so that way your story can be the best that it can be. Why? Because the world is waiting for your stories. The world needs your stories, and your stories need you to become the best that they can be. So put in the effort, do the editing that you need to do, because it will pay off. And people will love your story all the more for it. You will love your story more for it. And your story will be the best that it can be because of it. And that is what I hope will happen for the Wheel of Time series there on Amazon. I hope that they can pull it off. But I do have my doubts because of what I've already seen in the first 5 episodes. What is good is phenomenal. What is not so good ranges from absolute crap to interesting but not needed. And that last part, interesting to not needed, that usually sticks out even more so than the crap. And that is kind of what can kill an amazing story. So, food for thought out there. If you're looking for more writing advice, please check out our other videos here on YouTube. You can also check out our podcast episodes found on Podbean, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, the works. We also have writing exercises for you over at our Pinterest page, and we would love for you to join our community. Links for all of that is down in the description. And until the next video, y'all, the light be with you, and tschüss.